Okay.
Here we go. Wait a minute. Yeah, we are live now. Let me. Okay. Go ahead, Neha, ma'am.
Yes. Good evening, all, and welcome to this lecture series at Navrashna University School of Environmental Design and Architecture. We'll start the lecture series in tune with
We are live
nature
now.
in just a minute or two. Yes, good evening all, and welcome to this lecture series at Navrashna University School of Environmental Design and Architecture. We'll start the lecture series in tune with nature in just uh, just a minute or two. Yes, good evening all, and welcome to this lecture series at Navrashna University School of Environmental Design and Architecture.
May I request everybody to keep their microphone on mute? And whenever you are speaking, just that at the time you can unmute the microphone. Thank you very much.
Okay. The aim of this seminar series is to showcase the reflections and applications by the design professionals to sensitize the budding designers towards the various approaches and aspects of ecological design. As most of us know, our profession has resulted and created a lot of chaos with respect to natural resources and degradation of the ecosystems and the natural and the built environment, and it is the onus on us as designers and architects to take it up to mitigate the damages that we have done in the best possible manner through sensitive design approaches. And our first speaker here is architect Malaksingh Gill. He's a renowned architect from Bombay with over 20 years of experience. He has worked with Padma Shri Laurie Baker at his organization Costford, and he has been focusing his practice towards ecological practices and involving a lot of local clientele and local materials and construction techniques and expertise. He has also been considered as one of the top 10 ecological warriors, so to say, by Better India. And without much delay, I would pass the screen to pass the mic to Malak. And Malak, welcome here, and we
Thank you,
want to
Neha.
make the best of it. Yeah.
Thank you, Neha. Thank you, School of Environment Design and Architecture, Navrachana University. So it is it's a great pleasure to actually speak on this topic. Uh, I have been interested in this as a student, as an architect for last 2 decades, and it's so nice to see a whole lecture series curated for this. I will share my screen and speak in the context of those slides. So as Neha mentioned, I did work with Laurie Baker ji in the year 2000. And this is a list of principles which Baker ji has listed down for most architects to practice. And the fine print is as interesting. So I'll let you just look at it while I talk about Bakerji, and the right image really is typical of the construction materials and technology which Bakerji is better known for, where you see a lot of exposed brickwork, you see a filler RCC slab, and you see generally a lot of attention to detail, whether it's fabrication or the landscape or the flooring. Now, Bakerji essentially for me as a student was the only ray of hope in this entire gamut of practitioners, who spoke about the environment, who practiced, and who had architecture for us to show as reference that this is eco-friendly architecture, and hence we would like to pursue it. So I went and worked with him. This is where Bakerji lived. This is what Bakerji built himself as his house. And you will clearly see when why this is so appropriate for this lecture series, when it's called In Tune with Nature. uh, so just like a small story where we have, when I was working there and many years hence and many years before, we have constantly had a problem of these venomous snakes visiting this place, and some of us rush to go and help around with it so that we can shoo it away. Now that is because when Bakerji really bought this place, inherited this small patch of land on the hill, it was extremely green. Uh, in fact, the surrounding was not very green, but this land which Bakerji took care of became extremely green, and therefore all the biodiversity from the surrounding lands would come and end up at Bakerji's house, including the snakes. So it's not just a beautiful house for Bakerji and family, but it's also for all these this biodiversity which lives around that area. Now, after I trained with Costford, which is Bakerji's organization, this was the first project I did. It was also first such project in Bombay.
Malak, can
Uh,
I just interrupt you for a minute? Can
sure,
you
sure,
make it full screen so it's visible clearly to everybody? Thanks.
sure. Thank you, Neha. Uh, so this is the first house I built. Um, so this is in Bombay, and it is Bombay's first such house where we use exposed brickwork. And I was just basically trying out what I learned at Bakerji's. But it was important because I had grown up through 5 years of architectural education where I was taught that you cannot do this in Bombay, because for the excessive rains, and how will an exposed brickwork building survive? But once I had done it at Kerala, I was sure I could do it at Bombay. So here's that building. The typical features of Bakerji's, exposed walls, filler slabs, and of course some experimentation where we did a staircase, cantilevered staircase with Kadapa stones, and one was always trying to uh, push the knowledge one had using some scrap materials like the fabrications, the grills, uh, using different kinds of fillers, a bay window, some beer bottles in the walls. Another project near Mumbai, which I did, and this one was in an RCC frame, RCC columns and beams, but I still managed to, keep the parts of the walls exposed, because, it was just not required to plaster. But here again, it was very interesting. This is an artist village, which was developed by Charles Correa, and now that the houses have kind of lived their age, people are pulling them down and making new houses, and most of them, not very pretty RCC kind of cemented plastered buildings. I also had to do an RCC building in its place because it would help me to conserve the square footage carpet area. But this entire building is just based on a 4.5-inch thick wall, and even the columns are, just 6 inches wide. So columns and beams. So the idea is that even if we are doing RCC buildings, we can push our understanding of structures to keep to conserve materials and not use cement and steel irresponsibly. Another shot of the building. Uh, Now, most of our education, in architecture, generally has been focused on the left side of the screen, where we're looking at the monuments, at the kind of buildings which show the peak of technology used. And I was challenged in this aspect because the moment I got projects from outside the city, from the small towns, from villages, I realized that most of the architecture and most of the people live in the semi-urban and rural areas. And I just had to reverse my viewing frame, from this monument. I had to look at this large kind of built environment, which has actually preceded the monument, which is much older than the monument, and also outlives the monument. I mean, it exists even now. The technology is contemporary even now, and people are building their houses like that. So my focus had to shift from the cities to the villages. And once I had to do that, I started looking deeper into the statistics. This is according to 2011 census, that such a huge population actually lived in the villages. Um, I was just looking at where are we going. In the next 10 years, we will have built as much as we have built in the last 30 years. That's around 20 billion square meters. And where is this 20 billion square meters going to be built? Also, I was trying to see what is happening, between the city and the rural, the classic, urban rural kind of dynamics. And I was trying to see that most of the materials which we use are responsible for a lot of pollution, and not just that, but also huge amount of migration, which is largely under distress. So you can see the three maps below, and different kinds of workers, people who make bricks, who mold them, then who fire them, and then who load and unload them, really are, migrating from lesser developed areas to the more developed areas. And this is all part of the choices we make as architects. Example is brick, burnt brick. I would also like to base, my argument on this iron triangle, which is basically taken from the book by Madhav Gadgil and Ramchandra Guha, uh, where what is explained is that this triangle of administrators, decision makers, and beneficiaries, and most of us, are beneficiaries uh, as users of architecture and also as makers. Uh, some of us decision makers also. But all this entire triangle really works at the cost of what is at the bottom of the page. All the resources come from either the wild forest, or from small towns and their water catchment areas. Also, the people come from those places, the ones who build the buildings. So it is very important to position oneself, as an architect, as in what is the kind of watershed that your work has. Where do the resources for your work come from? So it's nice to find ourselves on this triangle. I was, able to at least identify a few ways of practice, few traditions in practice. The upper one is a high style tradition, which really looks at, you know, uh, the kind of buildings that you see, but also that it's very, very different from the folk tradition, where if I was to ask a question about who has designed these buildings, from the high style tradition, you will definitely find someone putting their hand up. But in the folk tradition, no one can identify themselves as the designers, because it's a huge, huge kind of group of people who have designed these buildings and over a very large span of time. Uh, so there's no kind of intellectual property rights, but it's a collective uh, property without rights. Also, the kind of involvement, also the kind of pretense which is involved in the folk tradition is what really attracted me. And I was seeing a very, very quick change in this landscape, in the semi-urban and rural landscape in the last, maybe 30 years post-liberalization. So I decided to focus, my practice in smaller towns or semi-urban places after doing those couple of buildings which I showed you till now. And that threw another kind of challenge, because if I was to use, a technology even like what Bakerji has, made very popular in rural areas, I would have to train people. And I'm still using cement and concrete. Uh, so that's going to make the building expensive. Uh, the labor, everything time consuming, and also would limit my kind of impact as an architect, because I'm kind of going everywhere and teaching people. I changed my approach. Instead of going to these small towns and rural areas and teaching, I decided to learn, because essentially I realized that I was actually going to the places where Laurie Baker learned from, because as he has said that he has learned everything from the craftspersons in these villages. So I started looking at the skills of people. This is a project just close to Goa. It's a place called Kudal, and we had to make a homestay where the clients wanted to, design a home where part of it was theirs, and part of it they would give out for guests to, come and stay. It's a kind of retirement plan. So this building, had a 180-degree sea view, uh, and we had that challenge that we had very strong winds. So the entire sea side, southwest side, was designed with verandas. As you can see, that's the view from the seaside. And this is how the building, I mean, the sea looks from the building, first floor of the building. So I decided to pick up from the local techniques, and we just engaged the local people to work with us on this design and building. So this building is made with laterite stone, which is locally available. We did away with the cement in this building. So right from foundation, it is laid with mud mortar, with a bit of lime, and all the masonry is pointed with lime. All this is available locally. Also, the entire structure is standing on, the floors are standing and the roofs are standing on wooden frames. So they are also all local wood. Also based on the knowledge which the local carpenters had. So no one came from outside to build this structure. This is how it looks from the from the west. From the inside, we have made some of these walls are also made completely in mud. Like it's a mud, which is a cob technique where you use mud to make the entire wall without making masonry units. You can see the floor, which is a timber floor. And all this at the cost which is equal to the conventional RCC buildings which are being built in that area. Even the paintings this painting is of the actual view which you get from the window, the sea and a little kind of rocky outcrop, made by local painters from the area. That's a mud wall, plastered with mud. That panel which you see is actually a mud wall, plastered with a mud plaster and painted by local painters. That's the first floor veranda. Closer to Mumbai, a house in Kamshet. So this was a type of buildings which I was doing now, where I had done away with using cement and steel completely. These are homestays. I managed to convince the client. Same here, entire building built with mud mortar right from foundation, local timbers used. The model becomes a very important part of our practice, because we work with local, craftspersons, and very often they are not able to read drawings. Also, terminologies differ, so the model actually blurs all those differences. So we make a good for construction model, and that works very well for us. That's the house from the other side. You saw the entrance before from the west. That's how it looks from the east. The site is a bit sloping. That's how it looks from the inside. You can see the timber first floor, attic above, terracotta tiles. This house remains extremely cool even during summers. That's a lime plaster on the walls. We also, I must mention that, we really like to work with the clients, very closely. Clients participate in the entire process and, work with us in choosing small parts of the building, furniture, finishes. So we believe it's a partnership because until it's their expression, I think buildings are over designed these days. And I think the house finally needs to look like the person's house rather than the architect's design. That's the veranda, and which is really the most interactive part of the house. That's what you can see from the veranda on the ground floor. That's the process of making. There you can see the arches being built. You can see the building behind in the background, where the walls, they're all in mud mortar. You can see the arches being done in mud. My architects who are working along with the masons. And then this is how the arches look. That's how the first floor looks, with the wooden floor and the clay tiles. Extremely comfortable in summer. And that's how the building, opens up to the view on the east, on the first floor. After doing that building, the client, decided, because it was very successful venture and they were really doing well at business. So that was a 5,000 square feet house with almost just three bedrooms, because it was, a home stay. Then the client commissioned another building right next to it. You saw that this house had a view to the river. So because she needed more rooms, she commissioned a house right in the same plot, but perpendicular to this building, so that we can avoid cutting the view of the first project. So you see a very linear plan, a series of rooms, and therefore we thought that if it's just a kind of linear thing, we could use a language of arches because it's a unidirectional kind of building. So that's how the building turned out. This was on the opening day. And you can see the building, the old building to the right. This is perpendicular to that. It's actually the side open space which was there. And that's how both the buildings look together. So while there is a continuation you can see the building behind, the big building behind, the one I showed you before. While there is a continuation in the materiality, but language of the construction is different. Materials are the same, and it's done by the local people. So, we are also learning techniques, passing on some innovations. But at the end of the day, the building looks like, the people have a feeling that, wow, this is beautiful. And not that the question they have in their mind is not how the hell did they make this, but the feeling is that, wow, we can also make it, because it's their own kind of cousins and kin who have built this building. So that is also a hidden agenda I have, that, well, sure enough, I'm building for this client, but I'm also speaking to the local population, and I'm showing them that, this is some architecture to look up to, not just the kind of buildings that you look at, from the cities, or the people who go back to their villages and build these kind of concrete unnecessarily, using concrete and steel. But these are also buildings which can be built, and it was quite successful. A lot of people are wanting to get similar buildings done from us, right from the millionaire to the farmer. This is another in the same series of similar projects where, but this is a house. This is a kind of weekend home, not a homestay. I'll just run through this quickly because it's the similar typology. Buildings without cement and steel, except for, of course, the tiling, etc. Veranda is a common feature, local wood, local craftspersons. Another feature you will see in the buildings I'm doing is, since we are in a warm and humid, a lot of the buildings don't have walls in the living, dining, and common areas. The walls are only in the bedrooms and kitchens sometimes, so that basically there's a question of privacy, etc. But otherwise, a lot of these, uh, common and public spaces are all open. They don't have walls. They have just kind of fabrication and glass partitions. There's a staircase which we detailed out. Interestingly, this staircase was detailed with the waste wood which we got from the roof. So each member of the staircase is actually a part of a roof. One is a common rafter, one is a batten, one is the planks we used in the ceiling as a boarding. This is a typical bedroom where it's just lime plastered and extremely cool. An attic, another house in the same series where it's a ground plus one structure. But here we used a couple of things we did. So these are all, of course, needless to say, all in mud mortar. Some details which we used, for construction. You can see on the top right, we've used a double tile. There's a bottom tile and another tile on top. That makes this house one of the coolest houses we have done till date, because of a double clay tile, the roof. So that creates an air gap and makes the building cool, apart from the other factors which, of design planning. So there's a double arch we have done, and you can see the double height. Those are the tiles we are talking about, where, and of course, there are these openings for letting the hot air get out and getting some light to get in. Now, there is a kind of house which I have done, where it's extremely linked to the ground and the resources are from. So you see these wooden columns and posts. This is a community house. These wooden columns and posts are basically those trees which you see in the backdrop. Those, just maybe a couple of months before this house was built, all these wooden members were those trees. So this community has been protecting the forest for more than 2 decades. So, when I was to design a community house for this organization, we just had to, learn from what the local typology was. We encouraged, the organization to adapt what is local building techniques and planning systems. Of course, there were people from all over who had come to learn what we were doing, and they participated in the. So it was a collaborative process. The community is called Vanwadi, and they have visitors from all over the world. So basically, that was the model. Bottom left, that is the building. You can see 3/4 of it is an open plan, and you have a kitchen, a small bedroom, and a store. And you can see a sketch of the walling system which we use there. We basically, it's a mud wall, a 9-inch cob wall, which is generally quite difficult to do. But what we did is we coupled it with these brick piers at every 7 feet, single brick piers, and we made cob in between. So those are the walls. And to the left, you see the model. Once again, the model is a big thing, a big tool we use. So this was our meeting with the carpenters over chai, and we explained the model to them, and that was it. After a month, we came back and the roof was built. They just had to scale it, take down a tree, keep it for some basic kind of seasoning, and up you go. So that's the roof. So we learned a lot of indigenous techniques from them. So they use an alcohol which they brew of the mahua flowers, which they use to really paint this wood. So that treats it. It's pretty good for many years. This is how we did the walls. So you see that there are these brick fillings, and then there is a mud wall in between. The stone shelves come in as stiffeners. So we put them in while the construction is going on, but later on they end up as a store. They help as storing shelves, basically. So they give stiffness to the wall, and this is how the wall was being built, the cob part in the center between the brick piers. And that's the house finished. In fact, so this is Gudi Padwa day when there was a celebration. Needless to say, there was no cement and steel. It's all mud, and even more, it's even more sustainable because it's built by the people themselves. Um, that's the party afterwards. Bakerji shared a concept of a core house. So, in furthering the understanding of a village house, this was very important because if you see this sketch, these sketches, you'll see that a central portion of the house is built as a core, just like an apple, which he has drawn up here. And around the apple, there are layers which grow. So the rooms, so the central core is supposed to allow these spaces to grow around itself. So therefore, when you design the first block, it can allow surrounding blocks to grow. So this is like thinking of the future, thinking of expansion, saving future costs. It's always been there in the village thinking. So Bakerji spoke about it while designing low-cost houses. And this is an example from the vernacular. In Wardha, it's a local house, very thick walls, mud mortar, very thick country clay tile roof. So this is the design which we did for a house over there. You can see the model. The exploded cross section. Those are thick mud walls because this is in Wardha where you have generally black cotton soil, so the clay content is very high. Bottom left, you see the lintel detail where the door frame is fixed with wooden pegs, wooden holdfasts into the surrounding cob wall. You see the lintel is made up of a combination of a wooden frame and a bamboo raft. And your top right is the roof cross section. This is how the house was done. It's a village house without any pretense, without trying to look like a showpiece, reflection of people's aspirations. This is how it was made. It is interesting how an architect can actually be a catalyst to go and revive a local technique when the locals themselves are unable to do it. It's pretty humbling as an experience. So this is the mud wall being built, 3 feet at the base and 16 feet tall. So as it goes up, it becomes 1.5 feet at the top. A bamboo boarding roof with country clay tiles on top of it. And extremely cool. You can just see the quality of light which comes in and how cool it is. I mean, if pictures could tell. Some details. You can see the mud wall. You see the details for the brackets. Now, part of my understanding of this talk is about nature. So part of my understanding is it comes from a theory of cultural ecology, where Julian Stewart really proposed that the cultural core, is there are some aspects of culture which are taken at a very superficial level, and there are some parts which are actually at the core of it. So when we talk about nature, uh, I have come to understand that you cannot look at nature without understanding how man has looked at nature, over the millennia. And culture is that kind of sieve or filter through which man has looked at nature. And like it or not, but our choices are mostly socio-political. Okay, what I mean is that I cannot design a house in a local area without going and making friends with the masons, without going and chatting with them over chai, without coming across as harmless to them. In fact, without showing incentive that they can learn a lot, earn a lot from my intervention. So there's a very socio-cultural aspect to my practice. Without that, I don't think I would have been able to conserve nature, because I have to get on the same plane as people in the way they look at nature, and then we can together, do it through our buildings. Uh, Here is the model of human ecology. Generally, ecology is mostly understood through, natural systems and the physical environment. But to the right, you have the ecosystem, but to your left, you have a social system where, unless you understand the language, the values, knowledge systems of people, you may not be able to actually access their ways of conserving the ecosystem, which is to the right. And there's a constant dynamic kind of exchange between these two systems. And as an architect, I have figured that I have to really take a ride on this process of exchanges. Without falling into that loop, I may not be able to really, affect environmental conservation, be it natural environment or be it cultural environment. So one has to become part of that system. If you see it, this can be a very, look like a very complex sheet, but there are just 3 or 4 broad heads. To your top left, you have the physical and biotic environment, and below you have the socio-cultural environment. This is part of my research, which I did for my master's program, and my research was based on improving my own practice. So uh, basically, how these environments, the physical, the biotic, and socio-cultural, how a dialogue and exchange between them really, becomes a very strong basis for coming to a built environment is what I have come to understand, or I seek to understand better. The techniques, which generally my practice may look like a kind of agglomeration of techniques, but the techniques are purely incidental. In fact, we do not do detailed drawings at all. What we do is system drawings, and every detail for every project, for most of them, is evolved at site with the workers, with the craftsperson, because every place, different craftspersons have different ways of doing the same thing. So we don't indulge in detailing to the last nail and screw. In fact, we deliberately leave it loose, and that way we are not slaves of our technology, and we don't have to get things done. In fact, we have to learn from others and just kind of exchange our plans with them and take a shared responsibility to pull it off. So it's a very different kind of practice. So technology techniques comes as a last thing. The first thing is to be able to make friends with people, understand why they build what they build, how they build it, and then we actually design the buildings based on what we learn from the people, and not vice versa. We do not build design first and then look for people to build. So this entire matrix is about that. You may be able to look at it in detail later. I'm giving you an example of a house I had done near Mumbai, in north of Mumbai, on way to Gujarat, Palghar district. This was a building existing at a site. and the owner did not like it. He got it done. Very interestingly, he told a village mason to build a village house, and this is what he got. He was away, so he had just commissioned it, paid him, and went. And this is what he saw when he came back. So he saw my work, got in touch, and said that Malak, I cannot live in this. So basically, it is very interesting to see that this is how today a conventional village contractor is perceiving a village home. The slopes are wrong, in the wrong direction. They are low. The materials are toxic. They're cheap, but they're very bad for health. And it's out and out an extremely polluting building. So we decided to look at what are the resources available. So this is how the land looked with that shed in the center. That is the building which we inherited, and now we looked around for what could be done here. What is the typical house in this place, and do people still have those skills and knowledge and the materials? So this is the typical house in that area. This is made, of course, the walls are done in a wattle and daub with mud smeared on it. But this is the shape of a typical building, and this is what this client had got. So we started to talk to people, found the owner of this building. It was getting dilapidated. They had left this house abandoned. Met the owner, did a puja, bought the house, dismantled the building, got 1/4 of the material required for our house from this building. And then, if you now see the center of the plot, if you can see, this is the new building we built over there. Not entirely with the material which we broke from that house, but the shape and the planning is the same as the local tribal pattern. This is the house we built in the same place. This is in the same location as this. And the house looks like that at the entrance. I'll just show you the spaces first, and then I'll talk about. So this is the typical tribal house plan. To your left, the top, you see the typical house plans. The plans are the same, just the materials have changed from wattle and daub to brick masonry. And you see both those cross sections in the center of the slide. This is the study we did for understanding the technology. This is a study we do for most of our projects where we don't know what are the types of constructions. And then to the right is our solution. It's a composite thing, composite building with the same plan, same grid, construction grid, but we just tweaked it for our advantage. Here you can see the plan and the model of that building. We have been doing a lot of hand drawings, as far as we can manage. Where we don't use computer drawings because they're no use for the contractors anyways. And we like to keep working a lot with our hands. Central core building. Remember the core building I told you about? The central space is a core, and surrounding all the four sides are verandas, as you can see in this. Central core and verandas on all four sides. See the cross section. You're seeing it from a veranda. So I showed you that slide of. So this is a bathroom where we have this kind of a smokeless water heating system. So you can take the cold water from the big container. In the small thing, you can take the hot water, mix it, and have a bath. So we don't waste water. And there's a glass tile in the roof, so you don't need to use a tube light or something like that. So remember that slide I showed you about the brick workers who have to migrate. And so this area has a big problem with brick making because most of the male population of this area is working in brick kilns. and they earn very less money, and they struggle almost all their lives to build a house in burnt brick. And that's after that they can get married or get their children married or something like that. So it's a very very big kind of uh, problem. So they're bonded labor fundamentally at the brick kiln makers. So in this house, what we did is we conserved all the burnt brick, which we broke down from that house, the original house, and we used it. Only 3 feet, only 3 feet from the on the outer walls, only 3 feet has been built with burnt brick. The remaining house has been built with unburnt bricks. Uh, the idea was to to do this so that the local people can see they can make their own bricks. They just don't have the money for the fuel, for the burning, etc. So they work at a brick kiln and they earn some maybe 25 paisa per brick kind of thing to earn money. So now, and fundamentally, what do they want to do with it? They want to make a house. So they can make their own bricks, not bake them, because we have made a house here which is using unbaked bricks. So the idea is that one has always been thinking that trying to make a house is not just making a house for the owner, but it is in a way trying to give back to the community around to try and see if some improvement is possible, affecting a much larger landscape than just the building and the owner you're building for. Some inbuilt beds. You can see the unbaked bricks, timber roof, all done by workers from around the area, not more than a kilometer away. So two of the bedrooms we left without windows because they had a plan to give out 2 bedrooms as homestays. So they said that, well, these guys, all they need is a mosquito net. Why make windows? And they were absolutely right. So people love these rooms without windows. There's a chick which we made out of the local Karvi reeds, and your bed is covered with a mosquito net, so it's extremely romantic. Oh, then the client also called us to make a cow shed without cement and steel. We were very happy to do that. So the cows are also happy. Some details in the wall for the cow shed, bottles for light, jalis for ventilation. Alongside, I have been teaching for a couple of decades now, both inside the classroom and outside, mostly on sites, so that students understand that construction is an act, it's not a subject. Um, and it has been extremely successful. So they make the arches and they break the arches so that they know how much UDL an arch of this size and thickness can take. Finally, our most successful endeavor is when our village craftsperson picks up some little design elements which we make in our buildings and make it in their own houses. You can see a bay window which Moru Mistri, who is the head of a village and head of a construction team, has made in his own house and showcases very proudly. So you can see the small ventilations below the seat also. Uh, so, uh, so this is our biggest achievement when people are, taking from our association, from their association with us and actually implementing it in their homes. Yeah, I think that's the end of my presentation.
Yes, thanks, Malak. This was a very humbling and exciting presentation. And thanks for setting the context of this series, for us as students of design and as also professionals of design, where the physical and cultural setting plays an important role. And our role as architects and designers to influence the communities that are there. And you're absolutely right. Actually, culture is a manifestation of nature and ecology. And unless and until we don't understand the cultural importance and the cultural ethos of that place, any building would be an alien building in that context. So I think it's a very enabling and empowering presentation. And I'd like to ask Pratyush if he has any comments for this.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure other colleagues also would like to say something, but Mr. Malak, a wonderful presentation, a very inspiring presentation. And I think your presentation, and one can see a kind of a deep commitment to the cause. One can also see how you have kind of internalized your experience with Laurie Baker, and in some sense, you have kind of, I'm very much fascinated and curious, more curious about your practice and how you have charted out a path. And it's some sense, I mean, your presentation does raise very interesting, provocative question. At one level, the question of what is a practice of an architect himself or herself. When you say you make systems drawing and you don't detail out, so those are very interesting points to think about. But I would, I'm more curious about one particular aspect, because I mean, the interest in vernacular, or the return to nature has been a theme for quite some time, almost quite a few decades now. And I was just wondering, when we look at vernacular, when we look at how people have been doing things so far, and then we as architects kind of come in and do something which we say is rooted in the questions of culture or ecology. And I'm just trying to wonder, what is the challenge? Because if I take this argument to the extreme end, then the architect should disappear and people should be empowered enough to be making their own houses. If I take this to the other extreme end, then the danger is that the vernacular becomes a fetish object, an object that gets commodified. So it's a very delicate line that architects have to tread. And then it's always a classic question that I ask, that what is the expression that one is seeking? There is an authorship of the works that you're definitely doing. You can't say there is no authorship. The nature of authorship is a communal authorship where we have collaborated. So what is it? Where is your practice headed in terms of? Would you say that I have arrived at a generic house that can be permuted or changed every time? Or are you also saying that I want to challenge this whole notion of a vernacular house, taking the spirit of vernacular and perhaps create a new form that we have not seen so far? I'm asking a much more, maybe an advanced question, but I'm just more as a colleague, as a practitioner.
No, it is welcome, definitely. See, we are always, I'm actually, I have just begun to understand, honestly speaking, many layers of this practice myself. When I was, a young, student or just finished architecture, I worked along with Neha at an office in Mumbai, and then I went off to work with Baker. See, I was already deep into thinking about the vernacular, etc. But my questions were different. I was like, okay, Baker is using less cement and steel. Interesting. He's figured a construction template for dealing with these urban areas, urban and rural areas in Kerala. Excellent. But I was extremely uncomfortable with with why weren't we using traditional techniques? What was this kind of solution which Bakerjee had made successful and popular, which was still using cement and concrete and steel? And I was trying. In fact, I was responsible for pushing Costford to start doing mud buildings. Uh, and for almost a decade, I was trying to perfect the art of making buildings without cement and steel, and then I succeeded. Interestingly, at the turn of that decade, I realized that it was not really what materials I'm working with,
Yeah.
but it's what process I'm affecting at the local level, in what way I'm affecting the thinking of people. Is that what is important? It's not really the material. It's if I can start a process, okay, of engaging with a local population. I might have to start with using some cement and steel. It's all right, but if I use it sensibly, that will at least get them on a negotiating ground to say, oh wow, this is interesting. We've never seen this before. Whereas my agenda for almost a decade has been that my architecture has to feed off purely the vernacular style. Okay, whereas now I've become more open to a mix of materials, and in a way of, rather than the product, in a way of enriching the process, because the process of making people turn towards nature is going to be by bringing them on a common platform, and sometimes it has to be different from an absolute kind of result. It has to be in an engaging process. So that has been a learning for me, and now I can understand Bakerjee's work much better, actually, more than a couple of decades, because you can clearly see that the guy had cracked it. He cracked the code of how to get a whole kind of state to agree to doing sensible architecture.
Absolutely.
It may not be as sustainable as a village house in terms of carbon footprint, etc. But then you're looking at Kerala, the highest literacy state, and there now, in fact, interestingly enough, half of Costford's practice, Bakerjee's organization's practice, is now of mud buildings. But like in Urdu, there's a shair. I don't remember the poet, but it says that "आह को चाहिए एक उम्र असर होने तक, कौन जीता है तेरे जुल्फ को सर होने तक." It takes time for
Yeah.
change to happen. So therefore, I think there is no rigid kind of typology. Every site is different because your approach is modular, but your solutions have to be extremely specific and process oriented, rather than to say that this is a house which Malaksingh has built. So the authorship is it's more like establishing a platform for dialogue rather than making a statement.
Yeah, thanks, Malak. Pragya Shankar, another colleague of ours, she has a comment and a question. Pragya, I think you can unmute yourself and ask. It's
Thanks, Neha. So I would like to first thank you for this inspirational work you're doing and you're sharing with us. And I would really like to appreciate the drawings that you have shown, the beautiful sections and also those joineries. Really pleasure to look at. One thing I would like to ask is architecture is many times it's very aspirational. And even in villages, you see people who have mud houses or brick houses actually want to live in concrete houses because it's very aspirational in nature.
True.
So, have you faced this kind of resistance when you were working with clients? And I mean, was it possible to convince them, or how do you deal with such situations?
Right. So very good question. The key word there is aspiration. Now, just to put the question of clients in perspective, I have a very vast range of clients. So there is a section of clients whom I do not have to convince. They're actually begging of me to make them a mud house or these kind of things. And that's a very huge section of my clients. And there is a section of clients who actually, look, it's all a game of aspiration, absolutely aspiration. My job is not just to fulfill aspiration. And I believe that that is a very big role of architects. We are doing it consciously, subconsciously. Our job has been not to fulfill aspirations. Before that, we have to create aspirations. The problem with the semi-urban and rural areas is that they've got the wrong models to aspire for. From most of our architecture fraternity and the engineers. And my job over there is through, so my buildings, the projects which I do, they may be a farmhouse, they may be a weekend home, but when they're set in the rural semi-urban landscape, like I said, their job is, my building does not just fulfill the aspirations of the people for whom I build, but they are also setting the aspirations for the people who live in those environments, who participate in the building which I make, and then I'm in a way I say that I believe that in the popular architecture, copying is the main way of inspiration. I'm not going to shy away from that. People do copy, and I am interested in making the right models for people to copy.
Thank you.
Yeah. Malak, there's another question from a student, Ishika Agarwal. She asks, how long is the life of this building if locally used materials are used? Local materials are used is what she's wondered, meaning to ask.
Thanks for that question. So, look, by virtue of not using RCC, you're straight away increasing the life of the building to by another 40, 50 years. You know that an RCC building cannot last in a sound way beyond 70 years, 60 to 70 years. That's after that, the bond between your steel and your concrete, cement concrete, starts to give way. So, so it's 60, 70 years. And then after that, if you do a kind of restoration, it's mostly like an open heart surgery. You can push the life further by another 10, 12 years. But if you use these natural local materials, the building might easily last double of that. There are village homes as old as 150 to 100 years because there's nothing to corrode. There's no steel which is going to corrode. So
Yeah, just extending that question a little bit. Instead of life, I'd like to ask you, what is the maintenance aspect of the buildings that you've been designing and building, especially because you've been using wood.
yeah.
So termites is an issue sometimes, and ants are an issue. So what is the maintenance aspect of these buildings?
Very good question, Neha, because I think, uh, there is a kind, it's what is important is what kind of maintenance. Because if you have life-threatening critical maintenance, then that is what I feel is the bigger problem. Whereas in these kind of buildings, you have very superficial maintenance required. And therefore, the cost of maintenance is very low. Importantly, I feel that the permanence of the buildings of RCC, etc., are they have their price to pay. In the kind of thermal comfort which they offer, the kind of microclimate which they give you, and all the kind of ecological footprint which they have. Maintenance of these kind of buildings is regular, but it's extremely local, labor intensive, extremely cheap, and it's not toxic. So that's the broad comparison. but there is no critical maintenance. For example, if something goes wrong in your slab, like I said, it's open heart surgery, right? The slab becomes only more delicate after that. But if something goes wrong in a wooden roof, you just have to replace that one member. It's modular. Just remove that member, put another member, and it's good for another 100 years. So that's the difference in the kind of maintenance which is there in these kind of buildings.
Great. Thanks so much, Malak. I guess we don't have any more questions from the audience. So I'd like to thank you for your insights and, for this enabling and empowering session for our students and fellow professionals. I think we'll call it a day today. And thanks so
Thank you.
much. Yeah.
Thank
you
you once
everybody for
again to
attending.
everyone. Pratyush, Neha, Navrachna. Thank you.
Thank you, Malak. All the best.
Bye.